Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I begin, Mr. Speaker, I would ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the topic of today's special order.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate so much this opportunity that we have this evening to inform and to educate my colleagues in the House and fellow members of Congress and even the American people through C-SPAN about the importance of local radio and television broadcasters. They are important not only to our country, but I want to talk about how important they are to our communities, the communities we live in, the communities they live in, the communities they work in. For decades, these broadcasters have been the first ones to respond to disasters and emergencies. They've saved numerous lives by their ability to be on the scene and to broadcast widely. They've helped communities pick up the pieces after a natural disaster or a man-made disaster. The broadcasters of our country, of our communities, have played a vital role in the quality of life in our communities. I've been blessed throughout my career, not just in public service, but in other positions, to work with local broadcasters hosting telethons to help find cures for diseases like muscular dystrophy and cancer and many other diseases that our communities have tackled together. Now, we need to remember that these radio and television stations, they're not monolithic corporations. They're owned and run and managed by our friends and our neighbors, the people that we see every day. Today's a big day, and this is an appropriate day to celebrate, not just inform and educate, but celebrate the role of America's broadcasters to our communities. Because today, hundreds of members of Congress were able to meet with their local television and radio station personalities and managers and representatives. Today, nearly 600 broadcasters came to Capitol Hill to tell their story of public service and to remind their representatives of their role. Now, you may not know that these broadcasters are required by statute to serve the public interest. And when I hear about the stories they cover, when I see the types of stories they cover, the lives they've touched, the service that they are providing, I'm heartened to know that we have a vibrant, thriving system of local broadcasting in this country. In other countries around the world where national and regional news is what is available to their citizens, here in the United States, here in places like North Dakota and Texas and Arkansas and others, we have a system of local radio and TV stations. So folks living in the same community are bound together by weather events, sporting events, news of the day, human interest, all provided by an accurate local source. I know in North Dakota we've seen weather emergencies where information from our local broadcasters was all that was available for those suffering the impact of a storm. I myself, with my family, several years ago, 1984, spent all night. This was before cell phones, I know. 1984. Spent all night in a car in a blizzard that came upon North Dakota suddenly, just off of the interstate. The only communication we had was through KFGO radio, which won a Peabody Award that year for broadcasting to us and to several others that were stranded in that storm. So today we're going to hear a number of stories from members of Congress across the country, also touched by their local TV and radio stations. I thank them for sharing stories about their local stations. And I'll share some of mine as we go throughout this special order. But I want to start off by calling on somebody who knows a fair bit about broadcasting, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Cramer. I appreciate the opportunity, and this is an honor to be able to stand up and advocate on behalf of our broadcasters who are not only my constituents or your constituents, but they're my colleagues, because I am, as you mentioned, a former broadcaster. And I know firsthand the importance of broadcasting, as you indicated, to local and national communities. And you talked about weather occurrence. Last week, my district, most of Arkansas, was blanketed with ice. And I can tell you that with certainty that a good number of my constituents were tuned into their local radio station, their local television station, to hear about school closures and to hear about road conditions and to hear about other community closures and shelters that might be available and any number of things that are necessary in times of weather that could put them in a position of distress. So it's very, very important. But I've got some statistics here that really speak to the value proposition that they bring to our economy. And in my district alone, there are 20 local television stations, 233 local radio stations in the state of Arkansas. And that's statewide, not district-wide. These broadcasters contribute $9.83 billion to our state's GDP, and they've provided roughly 22,000 jobs in the state of Arkansas. Beyond Arkansas, the entire country, local broadcasters account for 2.65 million jobs in the United States, and they provide, get this, $1.24 trillion to our GDP. As we talked about, they provide a variety of services to communities that they support. One of the things that I didn't mention, as a broadcaster, I was a farm broadcaster, so you can appreciate this being from North Dakota. Those farmers rely on those market reports, weather reports, bug reports, disease reports, any number of things, that information that's relevant to production agriculture that they rely on. And so that was one of the things that helped launch my career, and I was able to start a farm news network. It started with 4 stations, and it's now up to 53 in a 5-state area. And all of that is very specific to the local community and what's grown and raised in those communities. And so farmers have come to rely on that. And I'm sure it's the same in your home state of North Dakota. But I think the point that we're trying to make here is that every community is unique. Every community has their own needs, and no one knows those needs better than the broadcasters who serve those communities. And so I just want to say that as a Congress, I think it's our duty to support broadcasters who do so much for their regions and communities. And I appreciate you taking the time to make this hour happen.
If the gentleman wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask a question. I know we didn't rehearse this, but in this era of all kinds of new information technologies available and ways of getting information, streaming and cell phones and smartphones and the like, maybe you could just share a minute or two about why it's still important, that what role the broadcaster, the free over-the-air broadcast through the public spectrum, why that matters in this era of new IT. If that's
well, you touched on it right there. It's free. Over the air, they can access it. They don't have to have any kind of special tool other than a radio. Everybody's got a radio in their car, in their tractor, in their truck, in the office, whatever. And when everything else fails, you can't get a cell signal, you can't get your internet or whatever, the radio is reliable. And from the farmer's perspective, which obviously I have an interest in, they rely heavily on that, and there's an element of trust. Their local broadcaster is usually a trusted source of information. And so that's why it's so important and why they rely so heavily on their local broadcaster, whether that be their 6 o'clock news. I've been a news anchor on our local television station, and folks do become accustomed to hearing from you, and they trust that. But here's the other thing that's interesting about broadcasters. They're integrating new media in conjunction with their broadcasting. So it sort of supplements what their core mission is to provide that service to the community over the airwaves. But the great thing about broadcasters is they're very innovative. They're not a static business model. They are developing new technology. They're integrating new technology, and it all works together with the core mission being to serve their communities. And I think you're seeing that with you see fundraising efforts for Make-A-Wish Foundation and a local radio station. That's important. And radio stations, television stations are innovative in community support activities. Amber Alerts. Not only are they broadcasting those Amber Alerts, but they're using text and social media to supplement that and really help enhance their broadcasting efforts too. So there's a lot of these things that you can't get along without, I think, without our public broadcasters, our local community broadcasters, television and radio, who operate on the airwaves.
Great points. Thank you so much for participating. Next, Mr. Speaker, if I could, I'd like to yield 3 minutes or as much time as he needs to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pohl.
I thank the gentleman for having this special order. Let me bring an additional perspective to the importance of